podcast about the movement from painful experiences to meaningful music. I'm your host, Matt Connor. On our journey so far here on The Deepest Cut, we've spoken with several artists who each have different approaches when using their songwriting gifts to sort out painful emotions or traumatic moments. But what happens when there's no approach at all to be used? What if there's no song to be sung? I can speak from my own experience that in some seasons, the darkness is completely overwhelming. In those times, there's very little wrestling going on or emotional processing. Instead, there's just darkness, a complete depression or confusion that not only robs you of any creative impulse, but leaves you with really no impulse at all. It's complete disorientation, and the idea of processing something feels like a luxury. For singer-songwriter John Tibbs, the months entering into the pandemic of 2020 brought exactly that. Personal changes and professional frustrations clashed in traumatic ways that brought about a 2-year period in which John says he couldn't write, for a number of reasons that he documents in our conversation here. After years as a full-time artist on the road for over 200 days a year, it was a seismic shift and a downward spiral. That's what makes John's entry here on The Deepest Cut so interesting. The song that brought him out of that spiral isn't a chronicling of that pain or a description of what he learned. Instead, it's an exhortation that carried him out of the void entitled After the Night, a song he says arrived all at once. And now he's keen to share it with others in hopes that it provides the same sort of lift and light. I have to say that if you've never checked out John Tibbs' music, you're in for a treat. And that's especially true of this heartening conversation about disorientation and hope. This is The Deepest Cut with John Tibbs. Welcome to another episode of The Deepest Cut. I'm just so overjoyed to be sitting here with my pal, John Tibbs. We've already been talking and catching up. It's been too long interpersonally, but for the sake of everyone else, we don't need to tell them what's going on. John, why don't you say hello to everybody?
Hey, everybody. It's good to be chatting today with Matt.
John and I have been friends from a long time. He's a native Hoosier, like myself, so we appreciate that connection. I don't mean to be too joyful here. This is a podcast about painful music, so maybe we have the wrong tone. But John, just so appreciate you coming on the show, being here to talk about these things. I know we want to eventually get to your song, After the Night, and playing that, discussing the context of all that. But if I understand the context of it myself first, this was a song written out of a very dark period with a lot of dark things going on, and I think you even mentioned like one of the rare moments where like real depression had set in. Before diving into that, has songwriting been the vehicle out of other times like that for you? Like, I guess I wonder if you could kind of talk about songwriting as an emotional processing.
Yeah, well, definitely. So, I mean, actually, like when I was about 8 or so, I started having a stutter just like that. And so like a speech and communication growing up has always been different than other, people. And so composing songs has always been like a direct outlet where I didn't have to have that concern, especially because like I didn't have like a speech issue when it came to performing. So kind of like the idea of like, getting to like isolate from everything else and just like hash out a song has always been like a big part of who I am and has always been extremely helpful in responding to the things that are going on. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, absolutely. That's been a big, like healthy, piece of like who I am. And that's kind of how I ended up doing this thing is I just kept doing that over and over and over. But to like tie it to this, tune, I think that's what made this song so hard to write is I went through a 2-year period where I didn't write a single song, which had been the first time ever. Like I just couldn't do it. Like I had tried, and the like depression and some anger and confusion that just was like kind of clouded everything. And like I literally just didn't. And so like until I did like our tune that we're talking about today, like that was the day that kind of just like the gates like opened up basically.
I want to get into some of the context of that, or at least as much as you want to discuss. But I want to go back just real fast because you said even as a kid, or as 8 or whatever, right? Like, what was the first? Do you remember the first song you wrote? How old you were?
Oh man, I don't remember the exact one. I had a ton of so like I grew up in the evangelical church world as a pastor's kid. So, I think too there's a really big like expression of faith through song like experience, and so I think that was a big kind of piece of like who I had been as a child. And so it was definitely like faith oriented. I grew up, doing like offerings at church when I was probably, 6 or so.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so I was born in Kentucky and I actually like grew up in Pennsylvania.
That's right. I was like, I knew you from Indiana and not native.
I am an adopted Hoosier through Emily. So like our church in Kentucky, it was like 80 people. And so like I was the kid who did the offering. Yeah. So it had always been that expression of that outlet. I can't tell you, the exact, first song that I wrote, but it had always been there is what I'm saying.
So, in other words, even is it safe to assume that like the adolescent or teen years were filled with journal scribblings and songs? I mean, like was that pretty normal by then to process? As yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
as a songwriter, when you're dealing with personal things like this, how much of it do you wrestle with putting out there in lyrical form exactly what's going on? How much of it do you more like, let's shade this, make this more general, mask that? Can you speak to that and maybe how it relates to this song?
I, I've been doing this for over 10 years now. I think it is always pretty interesting to me how you can put out a tune that's so personal, but it connects to someone else on like a totally different universe. And then it becomes that for them. And so I absolutely try to be vulnerable and honest. I'm also intentional that I don't like pigeonhole things and that like a song can kind of carry its own journey to someone else. So I do think that I would say growing up and even like early on in touring full time and all that, I probably didn't have the EQ to like fully process everything that happens. And so I'm kind of glad looking back that I hadn't been so direct in songs because I would probably greatly disagree today with that. So I think that's the cool thing about art is like it gets to have its own journey, and it's like I am responsible to like be the steward of like that idea and to like put that effort into it, but then once it goes on out, it's like it is its own being and it can connect to people how it does.
I love that idea of, or I was fascinated by what you were just saying about, if I documented certain things at a certain age or stage, to then have to come back to that, like because it's in my catalog, because it's still there streaming on Spotify or maybe in the live set that people would want to hear, whatever, that maybe I wouldn't want things so black and white. Are there, maybe the answer here is just no, but are there artists who carry that well for you that you kind of look at and go, I love the way they handle that sort of tension?
I think Jason Isbell, like he has such a gift of kind of getting to the point in an artistic fashion that can also like if people don't have any idea what he's talking about, it can connect to them in a different way. But he's so on the point too. But you know, Jason's an older guy who's had his own experience, and he's probably like kind of like figured his stuff out. And I've been doing this for 12 years full time, and I am 34. So like I think I'm very glad that I didn't have the best, strongest opinions when I was 28 that I still have to carry on, and sing every evening. Personally, that's like something that I've been digging into, is like, I think in like our culture there's such an emphasis on like, you know like having all the answers and like being like a strong foundation of like wisdom and all that stuff, and I think that's important, but I think that when you have that like edge about you, it's like it doesn't give you the ability to say, I don't have that answer, or I used to think this and now I don't necessarily think that anymore, or like I'm unsure about this part of that. And I think that's the beauty of getting older, is like being flexible and changing. Like when I see older people who haven't changed their opinion after decades, I'm like, I don't know if I want to be like that, like be so sure. But when I see older people who are like embracing the questions and the uncertainty and like open to different, takes on things, like I think that's awesome. And that's kind of who I aspired to be. It's just like a very open to different, change and ideas as I age, because I think that that'll help keep you like active and engaged.
Yeah, I mean, boy, I couldn't agree more. By the way, I'm real informed by, I think, Richard Rohr in a lot of ways in this whole vein of certainty is a first half of life kind of thing. It's a juvenile construct, and mystery and open-handedness to things. Early parts of life are black and white, and your parents tell you that, do this, don't do that. We said it, the Bible says it. It's like everything's like very like nailed down, and then really as you get older you're like, oh, man, there's a lot of gray here. And that's not to minimize the value of what we're handed, or to say the Bible is what, all I just mean is I agree with what you're saying. And I think, Rohr says that portal into eldership, it's possible to be old and still be juvenile. Just because you're older doesn't mean you're an elder. It's a portal you have to willingly move through to get there. And one of the marks of that is sort of an okay with the mystery, right? Which is, I think, what you're saying. We're going down that rabbit trail. Suddenly we're going to have like an aging podcast over here. Obviously, I want to talk about the song. I'd love for you to tell us, like, can you document some of the things that were going on? Like we've said, it's a dark period, depressive period. What was happening for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, we found out we were pregnant like 3 weeks before COVID, and then COVID hit, and our universe changed twice. And I think in this kind of chapter in particular, I was struggling because Emily had gone back to her job, and I still wasn't touring, and now I was a full-time stay-home dad that also couldn't really take them places because of COVID. And so like I did not know anything about babies before having like Jack. Didn't know anything. It was actually this comical thing. So the summer before we were even expecting Jack, Emily and I were at a friend's house in a pool, and a couple there had a baby. And I was like, "Oh, how old is your baby? Is he like 2.5?" And they're like, "He was born a month ago." Like I had literally like no bearing of children. And so like I toured 200 dates, year after year after year. And that was the universe I was in. And then suddenly it's like I'm by myself at home as a dad, and I can't even like take him to Target. And so that was really hard. And, coming out of that journey, Em and I were trying to conceive again, and that just did not happen. And so it was like, it isn't based in like any sort of like evidence or facts, but it's like you tell yourself things like, oh, like you aren't a good dad, so you can't have a second one, or like you're depressed, and so you aren't even enjoying like everything that you have today, and so like that guilt, and it's just like I think in your head for too long by yourself, everything just gets jumbled up. And so yeah, so that was the season where I just did not write anything. And there was the whole thing with COVID and touring where it's just like let's like close down for 2 weeks, and then it was until like summer, and then the fall, and I played my last show in March of 2020, and I didn't play again until June 2021, so I was like completely out of it. And yeah, so but just the constant like changing the plan, and at some point it was like, am I ever gonna go back to that? Like, is that ever gonna be there for me, or is this just like what I'm doing from now on? And I didn't get to say goodbye to that old world. And I had always dreamed of like touring and being a dad and like getting to that change, and like but like kind of doing it intentionally, and it just happened so fast and unexpectedly. So yeah, it was through that season where things just felt dark, and I absolutely full on fell into a depressive state and season, and that isn't like something I've ever experienced before. That isn't like who I am. That isn't the experience I've had before. And so that like processing that for the first time on top of everything else didn't help either.
When you say I couldn't write, is that oh man, the thought of picking up a guitar, I just couldn't even do it? Or was it, I would get a guitar, I'd sit down like I normally would, and nothing would come out?
It was very much, I should do it. I should do it. I haven't done that for a long time. I should do that. I should do that. But like depression would kind of keep it, like I would come up with plenty of excuses to like sit down. And then when I went through all that effort and energy to actually do it, I would sit down and be like, I don't have anything to say. Like, this is pointless. And yeah, and so it was like 2 years of that.
And I mean, you mentioned this early. I think you said this earlier, but when you're not touring for all that time, by that time, like in that year, when you can't tour from, you said March of 2020 to when?
June of 2021.
Like, how many shows a year were you doing at that point?
Before I was doing 200 dates a year.
200 dates a year. I don't know if this is true for you, but when I've talked to other artists, the pandemic was a reckoning with people on their identity too, because it's like, oh, I don't even have to be a real person. I'm on the road so much that I'm someone new every night of the week to someone else. And now when I'm home, suddenly I never have this much time to consider who I am and what I'm about. And I'm never around my wife or my family this much for them to like see these parts of, like, I'm just never around enough to ebb and flow. And now you are. And so suddenly there's oh, who am I? I've been in this other world or mode so long.
Yes. I mean, I would think like I didn't fully like before get to like, experience like who I am at home. And then all of a sudden I became a dad too. So it was like, and I have no idea who I am as a dad.
It's a multiplier.
Yeah. So it's like all of that kind of happening at the same time.
This song is, for all that we're saying about it, it's not dark.
No.
In fact, it's like, you said when you sat down and this is what you wrote. This is like a very heartening, encouraging. It just almost sounds like what you would write when you're watching other people go through that and what you would want to say to them. Like, were you surprised that this is what came out?
Man, I had almost like a spiritual experience writing this song, especially given the background that like I didn't compose anything for that given time before. It was one of the first songs in a long time that I didn't have any external input on either. Usually you craft an idea or something, and then you take it to like a different person, you kind of like hash it out together, like that kind of thing. This was like one of the first songs since being in Tennessee that I didn't do that. And it all came out in like under half an hour. And like our home is on an acre and there's trees everywhere and there's birds. And I was just sitting on the couch and the windows were open and the birds were just singing away. And the song just kind of like hit me. And like I suddenly felt like just a immense experience of like hope, and that like, yeah, I have to give up this sense of like control, in like I have to give up the uncertainty, because I can't tell you if like I'm gonna tour again, but like this is the life I have today, and this is the like life I get, and I need to like be here and experience it. And I think that if I can truly do that, then I can understand that it's gonna be okay. And so that song just came out of me.
Was that the fastest any song had ever like been written?
I hadn't ever experienced like anything like that.
Have people responded to this song in a way that you would hope?
Yeah, definitely. It's so on the production end too, I think it's a little different than some things I've put out before. Like it starts out with like strings and it's very simple, and then it ends with like big horns.
You got the big choir that comes in, like
yeah, and I just wanted to like take people on that like experience of like that there's beauty in it all, like in the chaos and in the peace, like there is like beauty and there's hope. It's a journey, and man, I'm so thankful that I get to like do it. You know, talking about like being depressed, like this could sound very, very dumb, but like I had never been depressed like that before, and I'm very thankful that I got to experience that, because I think that's that is a human experience, and it's a gift to be on this earth and to like be a human, I think. And it's a gift to experience like that element that I hadn't ever before. And also just to be able to like have an idea of what other people, you know, experience too.
John, we'd love to have you introduce the song. Feels like the right time to just let people hear it. Anything you want to share about it, or you can just go right to it?
This is a song called After the Night. And for anyone who's hearing this today and is in a season where, you know, you are becoming undone, or you aren't confident in the things that are coming up in your future, or if you are just feeling tired, I hope that it'll connect to you today and just be a story that will tell you to just keep going, and there's hope and there's peace that all of us have access to.
Keep pressing on, keep moving forward, walk into the light, and after the night comes the dawn. You've been down this road before. What's another closed door? Come on, get up off that floor. I've seen the future and it's yours. If you need a helping hand, I will be your backing man. Well, together, yes, we can march on to the promised land. Keep pressing on, keep moving forward. Walk into the light, and after the night comes the dawn.
You've been listening to The Deepest Cut, part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Audio production and theme music by Isaac Vining. Logo and identity work by Meg Cook. The Deepest Cut was created and hosted by me, Matt Connor. Thank you so much for listening.